Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Hey, Brian, Michaelsville, Branch 274, Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania, Allentown. We are the center of the universe, of the political universe for the next 4 days. So don't forget, we're very important for 4 more days. All right, so at the convention, we passed having public rallies at key parts of the contract campaign. If we were to vote no, and I'm not saying either way do we vote no, but if we were to vote no, that would be a key part of the contract campaign. Would National commit to having a rally on the National Mall or in front of the White House, get 10,000 letter carriers? And if you would commit to that, the second question is how awesome would it be? Because it would be really awesome.
Oh, it'd be awesome, for sure. I don't know that it would sway Dennis Nolan very much. But we would likely, I'm not going to commit to something that specific right now, but we would, I think, give folks the opportunity. We would even organize here in DC. I mean, sometimes depending on notice, it's better to do stuff like that locally. Which, by the way, folks, that there's a number of branches that have had rallies and things like that locally. That's great. I don't have any issue with that whatsoever. And if the outcome of the ratification ballot is that it's not ratified, what would happen? Nobody's asked this question, but I'll answer it anyway. Is constitutionally, there's a time frame there. I go back and talk to the Postal Service within that 15-day time frame. I think there's basically 0% chance they're going to agree to anything different, so interest arbitration is probably where we end up. But having events and things like that, I don't have any opposition to that whatsoever. I just want to be clear about it. I don't think Dennis Nolan gives a shit if we have a rally.
Right, but the American people do. And I'm a firm believer in making our own weather, right? There's been a lot of talk about the historical antecedents that got us to this point, right? But there hasn't been a lot of talk about the last time historically that we voted no, and I'm not saying one way or the other, was 1978, when we voted no, and we were able to protect our colas there. Right? And that was a pretty good outcome, voting no, and that was the last time. So if we're looking at historical antecedents, 100% of them got us a good outcome.
Right? I would, if we got today's equivalent of the 1978 outcome of that interest arbitration, I think that would be significantly worse than this tentative agreement.
Okay.
Way worse.
So in terms of like discussing this with branches, because I know I'm being a little bit facetious on leaving here saying vote no, because you guys, you want us to vote yes, and we all have to kind of pretend that that's not what's happening, right? But can you? I'm selling the agreement. It's okay. I'm trying to sell the agreement. Can you ask local presidents here to commit to hearing the pros and cons of the agreement? Because what I'm hearing from, especially some of the smaller offices around smaller branches, is that we're having local presidents that say, we're not discussing any of the negative parts of this tentative agreement. We're saying, we can't discuss that. No, you get in line. And I would think it'd mean a lot from coming from our national president to say a lot, that you recommend that we have a robust discussion about pros and cons.
I don't, well, first off, the idea of saying, quote, negative parts is a subjective viewpoint to begin with.
Right.
This needs to be presented as I have done it here all day today. What I presented is objectively, here are the changes, and then I've also described very factually, Jim described in depth, the whole thought process and what we go through. That's what I encourage each of you to do. But in the world, we've got to learn sometimes, and look, I know the world around us is not this way. Everything doesn't have to have an opinion.
Here we do. We have to have an opinion of yes or no.
The members of the NALC have a very long and proud history as the most democratic union in this country of getting information and making a decision on their own. And that's what they will do in this country.
Let's get to my next question. One of the things that we've had to share objectively with our wives, girlfriends, husbands, partners, is they've been following along with the contract stuff too. They're not letter carriers, but they bleed like blue too. We had to go 2 weeks ago and say, honey, they finished the contract. Oh, what is it? What are you getting? In March, I'll get a $1.50 raise. It was embarrassing. What do you say to those people that subjectively think it was embarrassing?
Well, what I would say to them is that they should look historically at NLC's history of bargaining. They should look at all the things, and we should educate them on all the things we talked about here today. But the history, and the history is circumstances dictate to a large part what the ceiling is. Our union, under the circumstances that we described here and Jim talked about in depth over the last 14 years or so, frankly, have been awful to bargain under. And I don't think there's another union in this country that would have walked out of that unscathed, number one. And number two, the fact that we have continued to protect the standard of living long term. This contract provides more economic benefit to the 2011, 2016, or 2019 agreement. And we're going to continue to work on all the things we need to do to improve their finances going forward and create a better environment. I don't know, if the answer is what would I say to them, I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody and explain to them in depth so that they have an understanding, and then certainly they're free to form their own opinion. But I think to pull out anything and say, how's this contract, and say I'm getting $1.50 raise in March, that doesn't even begin to tell the story, no matter what step you are, no matter how long you've been here, how long you will be.
But the people I have talked to are a little J.G. Wentworth right now. We need cash now, right? So, like, we had just had a 20%, sorry, I burst out. We had a 20%, inflation's about 20%, right? So you get a 6% in the face of it, and then say you're gonna get the rest of that in 2 years. It's very challenging, it's hard, especially for people, I'm like mid to low scale, so it's a challenge. It is a challenge to wait for another 2 years to kind of get to probably where we should be now.
Yeah, which I understand that completely. I'll tell you right now, what we projected those COLAs to be, I don't know what the last four, the total of it was, something in the ballpark of $2,400 probably. I can tell you the Postal Service would agree in a heartbeat to give letter carriers a $3,000 lump sum and not have those last four COLAs in the contract. In fact, they might agree to give them a $5,000 lump sum and not have those COLAs in the contract. But again, this goes back to the economic structure that served us so well, because we don't know, what would our wages look like with the inflation that we saw after the pandemic without our COLA clause? What it would look like is the rest of the world. And, we see a lot of our brothers and sisters in the private sector who are, many of them, the presidents are good friends of mine, and we've seen them have great success, but a lot of them are coming off periods of time where they have dealt with multiple years with no increases. So it's just there's certainly room for an opinion on which is better. I just know, what has served us as a union for a long time, and of course I've had those conversations with others that have been around a long time, and that's the direction that we chose to go.
Do you think that, and this is a couple questions from our members, if Congress had been involved this last go-around, do you think there would have been, because that was one of the reasons we didn't want pure open bargaining, where we said, side by side or whatever, right? Do you think they would have knocked down, labor was so popular over the last 2 years. I think Congress on either side of the divide would have gotten behind a powerful contract and maybe made the post office say, yeah, let's pay letter carriers first and then we'll figure out everything else.
Brother, I wish that was the case. I'm not going to get in detail, but I would just tell you guys, when it comes to Congress's impact on our collective bargaining, it is 100% negative, 0% positive. I've had to sit in rooms and raise my voice with people in leadership positions that we would call champions for letter carrier issues that are pulling all kind of bullshit that makes our bargaining with the Postal Service more difficult. That's not to say that one party or the other, whoever's anti-labor, that's not the way it works in their mind. But there is almost nothing that they can do, whether in terms of something big, like actually passing a piece of legislation, which they ain't done that in a couple of years, or small things in terms of oversight of the Postal Service or something to do with DOL. There's almost nothing they can do to benefit us. Best thing they can do is we politely tell them is stay the F out of our business. Congress has given us, after all these brave men and women in 1970 walked out on strike, we went from being a union that had very limited bargaining capacity. We could bargain over some working conditions and hours, depending on Congress to get a raise, to getting full collective bargaining rights, and that's all we need from Congress. Leave us alone and let us bargain. Now, we need them to fix all the problems they created from a policy perspective to cause the Postal Service to lose all its money every single year. We need them to do that. What we don't need them doing is meddling in our business, and unfortunately, even our friends wade off into that territory sometimes.
And then just wrapping up, thanks for taking the time here. So another question from a member. When we're talking about comparability, if we go to arbitration, because we vote no, and we go to arbitration, isn't the argument for comparability already being made that PTF clerks are starting at $27? We're the ones that are exposed out to the elements, rain, hail, sleet, snow, COVID. If a clerk gets bitten by a dog, something really weird has happened. So, like, we're the ones taking the risks, and it's already been decided from arbitrators that we're supposed to be paid more. So, doesn't that fuel a lot of the comparability arguments within arbitration?
No, it could, but in that particular example you bring up, you know, the argument from the other side is, okay, what happens at the top end pay? What happens over the course of a career? You know, over the course of a 30-year career, you're going to make $300,000 more because of where our top pay is. So it is helpful in bargaining. The dropping off A and B is not going to get all the way there, but it is definitely closes the gap while maintaining and expanding on the gap between their top pay and our top pay, which was a big difference dating all the way back to their 2010, our 2011 round of bargaining following the recession. So it's helpful, but there's another side to that argument, and that's the top end pay. We certainly have to be cautious because you definitely don't want to put a neutral chair of an arbitration panel in place to say, okay, I'll raise this, but we're, you know, the better all things either.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Allentown Branch 3825.